Hello and welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I am Amarachi Ubani. This week, attention has shifted from the Boko Haram militants in northern Nigeria to the IS militants in Iraq. During the previous week, Iraq and the international community held a security meeting in Paris in which they agreed on a joint action on the militants. U.S. President Barack Obama has promised there will be no boots on the ground, at least U.S. troops, and so about 10 Arab countries have promised instead to do the legwork, while airstrikes will be executed by the West. Now, at the end of the meeting, leaders from more than 30 countries committed to supporting the new Iraqi government also in its fight by any means necessary, including appropriate military assistance, in line with the needs expressed by the Iraqi authorities and in accordance with international law and without jeopardizing civilian authority.
In the last couple of months, jihadist militant group IS, which was formed in 2013, has been brazenly perpetrating violence in Iraq and Syria, attacking not only government institutions but humanitarian organizations, videoed beheadings, kidnapping, and suicide attacks. The West believes that the threat posed by the Islamic State not only affects Iraq's Kurdistan region, but the entire world, where the West is the main target. Leaders from as many as 30 countries, including Iraq's neighbors, were in Paris last week to discuss political, security and humanitarian aspects of tackling the IS militants. The meeting was not attended by Iraq's next neighbor, Iran. Leaders agree on a coalition force supported by even 10 Arab states present. While the United States unveiled its outlined plan to fight the militants simultaneously in Iraq and Syria, President Barack Obama believes that the U.S. can forge a solid alliance despite some hesitance by some countries. He also made no promises of sending boots on the ground, despite a suggestion by the chairman of the U.S. Joint Security Chiefs, General Martin Dempsey, that with the growing threats posed by the IS fighters, he would not rule out that recommendation. By Thursday, French had carried out the first airstrikes against the militants. However, another layer of conflict has been grafted on to a series of parallel and overlapping wars in Syria and Iraq. Enemies of the Syrian regime, including Saudi Arabia, will want to calculate how much their actions against the Islamic State might strengthen President Bashar al-Assad, who has men tied up fighting IS. Iran and Saudi Arabia, regional superpowers backed opposing side in Syria. They will look very closely to see if American actions indirectly help their rival. Many argue that the Americans and the British tore open sectarian scars when they invaded Iraq in 2003 and now risk making matters even worse.
Kenyans are remembering victims of the attack on the Westgate shopping mall in Nairobi. It's been a year since the attack took place, and Kenyans all over the country are more security conscious now than before. The government has reportedly taken several security measures, such as increasing its budget on anti-terrorism, deploying police with more advanced equipment, and conducting more road checks on suspicious people and vehicles.
1 year on and the memories are still as fresh. Kenyans on Sunday held memorials to mark that day in September when 67 people were killed in one day in an attack perpetrated by Al-Qaeda-affiliated Al-Shabaab.
We decided to be here today in remembrance of those who lost their lives, and just to be with them wherever they are, and just to tell them that we are still together.
Outside the Westgate Mall, management and staff of the Nakut Mart supermarket, which recorded the worst experience that day, were joined for prayers by members of the public, most of them survivors.
In memory of the departed.
The chain lost more than 2 billion shillings in stocks, furniture fittings and businesses as a result of the siege, and more than 150 workers lost their jobs at the chain's flagship Westgate branch. Last year's attack has changed many lives and businesses despite not being directly affected by the attack.
Here, just here. Stay here.
The country's tourism industry has been the hardest hit by the attacks. Some Western countries have warned the nationals against trying some parts of Kenya, including its coastal areas, prompting mass cancellations. People are disappointed the government has not done more to improve security in the country.
Everyone talked about it for a month. The government said they're going to do everything to improve the security, but everything's been forgotten, you know. We're still not secure. Anytime we leave the house, we still are in the fear that something might just happen anytime.
We can up security, but fear is in the mind. It's very difficult to move someone from a place of not fearing to living that aspect of fear.
The government, however, is enforcing security checks before entering business facilities. Both individuals and vehicles are searched.
You'll see every building, you would be required to be frisked because before you enter there. And therefore, there is some, some significant change in people's behavior and consciousness.
But analysts believe that the government alone cannot manage to fight and curb terrorist attacks. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta has urged African countries to work together in fighting terrorism.
The issue of radicalization of youth and their exodus into ideological war zones must therefore be confronted if terror organizations' growth is to be curtailed. It is a challenge that requires a combined effort on the part of all of us.
Last week, the government saw a new intelligence chief tasked with curbing the rising threat from Somalia Islamic militants Al-Shabaab. Officials also say they have detained 2 Iranian men using forged Israeli passports to enter the country on suspicion that those men may have been involved in a plan to carry out an attack there.
Still ahead on Diplomatic Channel, the EU delegation in Nigeria holds its 3rd EU-Nigeria Business Forum in Lagos this week. We talked to the head of the delegation, Ambassador Michel Aarion, on this and more. Please join us again. Welcome back. The European delegation to Nigeria says it's operating on a tight budget, but has big dreams for the country. The EU is currently implementing, together with Nigeria, a support strategy focused on health, nutrition, sustainable energy, and access to electricity, as well as governance and rule of law, among others. However, during a news conference held last week in Lagos, Ambassador Michel Aarion explained the EU also has projects in trade-related infrastructure, in electricity, in health, also in nutrition, but says it cannot do this alone. That's why this year's business meeting is targeted at the private sector, as agreed at the 4th EU-Africa Summit held in Brussels in April this year. EU and African countries were tasked to promote private sector responsible investment. Now, I spoke with Ambassador Aarion a little later on the meeting and other aspects of the EU's presence in Nigeria and in West Africa. The business meeting the EU will be having next week, you're inviting a large delegation of business owners into Nigeria, right?
Well, in fact, we have about 300 people coming, and with more than 100 companies coming mainly from Nigeria. But half of them are in fact European subsidiaries, subsidiaries of European companies. So we are, in fact, we will have small, medium and large enterprises. That's very good to have the whole spectrum because of course the needs and the interests of a small company are very different from a big multinational company. I think it's very important actually to have Nigerian subsidiaries of European companies, because it shows that when we are talking about the business forum, we mean really a collaboration between Nigeria and Europe, between Nigerian companies and European companies, between Nigerian and individuals and the European individuals. The whole purpose of this forum is really to make the link between our development assistance scheme and the potentials of European investment and investors in Nigeria. The needs of Nigeria in terms of financing, in terms of responding to the internal and domestic demand are very large. It's not with little development project program that we will respond to those needs. We need private flows, private financing flows. We need private investments.
Coming back now to Africa, West Africa, Nigeria, the Ebola virus disease is still a very sensitive topic. Africa is still learning how to deal with the virus. How would you say we have fared in terms of awareness since the outbreak was discovered in Guinea in December 2013?
Last year it was in April, but yeah, in Guinea, it is indeed a major risk for the whole region, well, if we are talking about the region, the two most affected countries, Liberia and Sierra Leone, are really going through very, very difficult moments, and we are certainly not at the end of the crisis of EVD. Those two countries are very much affected. The impact in the short term, I'm not talking about the long term, the impact on the short term on the economy of those two countries is really serious, and also at political level, the stability of those countries is really at stake. That's why we have decided to provide an immediate budget support to those two countries, just to maintain the administration and the basic social services in place in those two countries. So we are going to help Liberia and Sierra Leone to pay their civil servants, just to give you an example, which is very important to keep people on work and to keep people active in providing social services in those countries and keeping people alive. I mean, giving some revenue and income to people in the capitals mainly.
I know you mentioned the EU is more involved and more focused in providing primary health care. Don't you think this is the time to be more actively involved in a health crisis on the continent?
You know, the immediate response to Ebola virus is certainly to treat people with immediate action, with water, with rehydration, and with blood perfusions and transfusions. So those who are really on the ground helping the health workers of the country are the NGOs, and mainly Médecins Sans Frontières, and the Red Cross, the International Federation of the Red Cross. Those are the two main partners of the European Union. Most of the workers are, by the way, European, and most of their financing comes from the European Union. So that has been our immediate response. But that is the humanitarian response, the immediate, just to save the lives of those who are affected. In the medium and the long term, you have, in parallel, to reinforce the capacities of the health systems, because Ebola is an endemic disease. Who knows what will happen next year? Next year we will have somebody else infected, and we will have again a new crisis. You know, Ebola has been discovered, I think, 25 years ago in the Congo, and every year you hear about an outbreak of Ebola in the Congo, in Democratic Republic of Congo. But in 20 years, the health structures and the health system have learned how to cope with this disease. One has also to better communicate about this disease. Yes, it is very dangerous. Yes, if you get it, you have 50% of chance to die, which is an extremely high rate of morbidity, but there are measures of prevention that you can apply in order to really prevent the disease. So it's not really the end of the world, this disease, but it's very dangerous, and it's very difficult to deal with it. So a short-term humanitarian assistance, but a longer-term structural assistance, development cooperation assistance to reinforce the capacities. And there is no choice between the two ways. You have to do both. And we are active in both.